Peace. Thank you for tuning in to Zulu Story. In case you missed part 1 and 2, definitely check that out. It's a must to check that out if you're gonna make sense of the story. Because this is part 3. So go check part 1, go check part 2, and then definitely tune back to part 3 so we can just continue the story. So where I left off is we started having our meetings at one of the elementary schools out in Huntington Station, Long Island. And from there, we was probably having meetings like weekly, on a weekly basis. And, like I said, the emphasis was to really introduce the Zulu Nation and the ideology to the membership and potential membership because, we were having dudes that we put on to the organization that were brand new, as well as people that were interested but didn't commit to the organization. So it took a certain amount of time for them to build up, the interest, and then see if they wanted to commit to the organization. Because I just didn't want to put people on and say, hey, this is Zulu. I wanted them to learn and understand what the philosophy, what the ideology was. Learn also, the history, the 20 laws, the 15 beliefs, and the 1 through 7 infinity lessons. As my story goes, as a leader, as a young leader, I told y'all I spent a lot of time reading the infinity lessons, a lot of time doing research on the Zulu Nation and just gathering as much information as I could. And the crazy thing about it was, during the early stages of me being a part of the Universal Zulu Nation, I was not attending any meetings. I really didn't have much advice, much education on the Zulu Nation, other than what the brother Lead Rock was giving me, other than what the brother Joe and Hood Humble from Brooklyn was giving me. And, they were giving me a lot of jewels, don't get it twisted, but, it still wasn't the same as when you attend meetings because as time progressed and we eventually started going to universal meetings, and what universal meetings are is it's a meeting at a central location. At the time we were having these meetings out in Harlem. The universal meetings were going out in Bronx River. Then they went to after Bronx River was shut down by Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. They went to the church, I believe, in Harlem somewhere. And then after Harlem, the meetings started to resume at the National Black Theater. They were there for a lot of years. So really, just not having a connection to the main body of the Universal Zulu Nation and its elders and leaders was it was something that didn't help us flourish. It didn't help us be successful, and we didn't have the support that a normal chapter would have during its inception. And that was a bad thing, and that wasn't my fault nor really anyone's fault, because when we were under the impression, being down with Brooklyn Elite, was that the founder, or should I say co-founder of the chapter, Zulu King Silver Dollar, he excused us from universal meetings. He said, Elite and Gestapo, we don't got to go to meetings in Harlem. Y'all could just do y'all thing. So, with that being said, we were like, all right, we don't got to go to Harlem for the meetings. So we really had no interest in going to them. I had an interest in going to them because, if you're going to be a part of an organization, then, you should be in the mix. You should be building with the brothers and sisters in the organization, and also letting them know, where you're at, where your chapter's at. You know what I'm saying? It's important. Like in the Zulu Nation, we critique one another, we build with one another, and if we see something that needs improvement as far as your membership, as far as your actions, as far as your personal ways of doing things, we always open our mouth and we let it be known, hey brother, you ain't doing it right. This is the way to do it. We always striving to improve ourselves and build ourselves to be greater at everything we do. So what happened was, during the infant stages of, Elite and our Zulu Nation experience out in Long Island, we attended a Rocksteady Crew anniversary. It might have been July 2000. And we went to this probably about 12 to 15 deep from Long Island, Zulu Nation beads on, repping. We were representing. Because at the time, Rock Steady Crew was a part of the Zulu Nation. It was starting to not talk about that. It wasn't as known as years before that, where Rock Steady was kind of known as a chapter of the Zulu Nation. Crazy Legs and them started to I guess not mention their affiliation to the Zulu Nation for whatever reason. I guess Rock Steady Crew took on its own identity and started to become, in a sense, larger and worldwide known for being a hip hop organization on their own. They kind of didn't need the Zulu Nation no more. But nevertheless, there was still a lot of Zulus that were involved with the Rock Steady Crew, and they were putting on dope shows at the piers in Manhattan every year for free. And it was to go to a hip hop show and see some dope acts for free, it was a must. Especially the hip hop heads. So we went out there to me, when it was repping time and we had to go to an event, I always wanted to mob up, roll out deep, and have our presence felt. And also just just to connect and build with, other Zulus and other like-minded individuals. So we at the Rock Steady Crew anniversary, it was packed. I'm talking about, man, it was no room to even move on the pier. I'm surprised we didn't wind up sinking in the pier, the dock, into the water and all drowning and dying. That's how crowded these events were. But on the way out, a whole bunch of my members were getting stopped by a big Asiatic brother, a big black brother, so-called black brother, named Q. He was stopping everyone, I guess, because they had the beads on. And he like, yo, you Zulu? What chapter you from? And everybody's saying elite, and they're like, yo, who you under? And they were like, L1. He's like, yo, who's L1? Who's L1? So eventually, I was the last brother there, and I got to him, and he didn't even greet us as a Zulu, if I recall. He kind of just pressing us, or, some in New York say G-checking. And he was like, yo, how y'all brothers down with the Zulu Nation? I'll be seeing y'all at Universals. And I'm like, yo, the Silver Dollar said we ain't got to go to Universals. He like, well, yo, I'm Q. And he pointed to his shirt, and his shirt had a Q on it. You know what I mean? And the brother's a dreaded, big brother that was imposing. His stature was intimidating, I wasn't really intimidated much, but, he definitely didn't look like no slouch. Son was a warrior. You could tell he meant business, by his words. So the brother was like, I'm Q, and I was talking to Bambaataa, and Bambaataa said all Zulus got to attend the unification rallies, the universals. It's law, which in fact, it's one of the laws of the Zulu Nation. All Zulus are to attend unification rallies, right? So we was breaking that law, but in elite and Gestapo, those are the Zulus that felt they were above the law. They were the street side of the Zulu Nation. So, we didn't care to go to the meetings. It was we felt like we was the outlaws of the Zulu Nation. And so I told the brother, I'm like, yo, I let him know, we don't go to Universals. And I think we exchanged maths at the time, and he said he was going to holler at the brother Bear. Bear was one of our leaders in Elite, right? And he was from the Bronx. And, shout out to the brother Bear. Good brother. Peace. So we were basically oh man, the brother pressed us and we didn't like it. We were like, yo, we should just run down on him, you know what I mean? And basically I talked to the brothers out in Brooklyn and they were like, yo, who the fuck is he? We don't gotta go to meetings. We're gonna run up on him and let him know, yo, what it is, And I remember we wound up going to our first Universal out in Harlem at the National Black Theater, and the purpose was to set the record straight. We wasn't there to build. I mean, I didn't go there with the intentions of fighting another brother, because, Zulus don't deal with the animal nature. The animal nature is the negative nature. Zulus must be civilized, right? That's one of the laws. So, a brother like me, I strive to live by the laws and live by the codes of the Zulu, right? So brothers was felt disrespected in a way. I didn't necessarily feel too disrespected. I really wasn't sweating it, but brothers wanted to make it known, like, yo, you can't tell us what to do. And we had a cipher with the brother Q, and he was basically explaining himself, and son was he was a fierce brother. He wasn't intimidated by us going over there. We was talking to him, probably like 5, 6 of us, and it was just him. He ain't need no backing. He ain't need nobody to hold him down. He was just saying it like it is, like, Ben put him on a mission to get the Zulus to come to the meeting, and he was doing that mission. We respected it. You know what I'm saying? We respected son's gangster. His strength was a strong vibration. It was magnetic. It made you draw to the brother, and you could tell, aside from him being fierce, the brother had such a strong mind, and he spoke fairly eloquent for a brother looking so tough. He had a lot of knowledge of self. You could tell because it was just demonstrated in his speech and how he dialogued with you. So from that point on, when we had a meeting out in the hood, we decided that going forward, although we didn't have to go to the universal meetings, that we were still gonna go to the universal meetings just to get in tune with the movement of the Universal Zulu Nation. And that was a very good move because, why be a part of an organization if you're not going to connect and build with the like-minded brothers and sisters of your organization? To me, that if we would have just stayed out in Long Island, kind of doing our own thing, that would have made us like a renegade faction of like a break-off group of the Zulu Nation. And me personally, throughout all my years of being a part of the Zulu Nation, I always felt it was important to be validated by New York City because we was from Long Island, and people may have slept on us or thought that we weren't valid out in Long Island, because it was, Zulu Nation was known as such a Bronx, New York thing. Boogie Down Bronx is where it started, and it was always like, oh, if you ain't from the Boogie Down Bronx, the motherland of the UZN, you ain't a real Zulu. So I think like a lot of us out in Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island, I'm sure probably the Zulus in Staten Island, and I'm sure even for the most part some of the Zulus out in Lower Manhattan at the time, always kind of felt like, we weren't like in the mix or respected like the Zulus that were from the Bronx River, Bronxdale, and all the original areas that the Zulu Nation congregated at and had a presence. Going to the universal meetings was the best thing we could have did, for the organization. It allowed us to not only meet a lot of like-minded individuals, but it also had us, had given us the opportunity to learn the infinity lessons and just a lot of lessons in general. We started to build with not just only our peers, but a lot of elders that, were 10 years older than us, sometimes 20 years older than us, 30 years older than us, and then some original Zulus and some original Black Spades that were still in the mix. So you would go to, we would take the train, personally. We would take the train 10, 15, maybe even sometimes 20 deep when we were strong, and organized enough to go to taking a train from Huntington to Long Island Railroad all the way to Penn Station, and then take the 2 train or the 3 train uptown to 125. It's funny because one of the first times we went to Harlem, we took the wrong train. We took the 1 train to 125, and that left us on the other side of town. And it was probably our second universal we were going to, all of us from Long Island. And as soon as we got off the train on 125, it's about 12 of us. We all got the red, black, and green beads on. It's the year 2000. We bump into like 15, 20 bloods on our way there. And dudes is looking at us like we're crazy. We look like we just jumped off a spaceship. And it was looking like it was going to be some type of static. But I think they realized, like, it would have probably been a wild fight. And I think they realized, these guys down with the Zulu Nation. And I remember me and one of them bloods talking, and they basically said we went off on the wrong side of town. They knew where we were supposed to be. More on the next part. Peace and love.